Good. Wow, it's great to be here. It's especially nice that we got the chat opened up and to see people from all different places and I mean including Berlin. Hi, Isaac. And I heard an Australia in there somewhere in Canada. That's fantastic. For all the drawbacks of needing to use Zoom for things, it's always heartening to me to see people from all over and all different geographies. So I want to introduce myself first. My name is Gavin Van Horn. I'm the executive editor of Humans in Nature Press Books and the series co-editor along with Bruce Jennings. Bruce, if you want to wave. Yeah, there he is. Um, I live in San Luis Obispo, where the elementals are constant companions in the form of ocean tide, sun-kissed hills, and bay laurel strewn paths. As for me, I'm a follower of migrating humpback whales and a devotee of hummingbird sage. So what is the Center for Humans and Nature? For those, some of you might be very familiar, you might have found this event through our newsletter, but for those of you who aren't, and maybe for even those of you who are, we're a nonprofit with a mission to expand moral imaginations and to express in art and writing, and now on our farm and lands in Northern Illinois, ways of becoming good relations, ways of becoming kin, and ways of becoming acolytes of the elements. We say that the land that where our offices are now, that we're caring for, is where ideas take root, where a worldview is expressed through the soil, and our ideas come from you, meaning our contributors here on screen, but also those of you who are in the audience tonight. One thing I appreciate about the center is its sense that we come up with the best way forward together as a collective, that none of us are in isolation. The center is an ecology of ideas as much as it is ideas about ecology. So a word about Humans in Nature Press Books that falls right along those lines. We specialize in collective projects like the ones that hopefully you hold in your hands at home, but this book series here, Elementals, of which Air is one of 5 volumes, and I hope you'll be able to tune into the other events that we have for this series. We gather people around the table at the center from different geographies, cultures, fields of work, and walks of life, and we ask big questions. And these books represent that, a big question. Like in this case, what do the living forces, the vibrant matter, the vital energies of the elements, earth, air, fire, water, teach us about how to live? We learn from and we're inspired by one another, and that's why we're here tonight. And if you want to go deeper, please do check out and support our work at humansinnature.org. I'm not going to say smash or hit that like or subscribe button. On to Air. One of the most prominent things that stood out to me after working with the various authors and seeing the diversity of topics and people that Dagan Miller pulled together as an editor of this volume was how air is not a vacuum. It's not empty space. This perspective has shifted for me, even in how I think about the world when I take a daily walk through a local park. I'm not so much moving through emptiness as wading through rivers of life, from midges to mayflies to airborne spiders catching a ride, to microscopic particles to microbes, to the very stuff that gives us breath. For me, after reading this volume, air became substantial. It became a living substance. Consider that we wouldn't be able to hear anything were air not something quasi-solid. The vibrations of language, of creaturely conversation would never reach our ears. There'd be no reason for ears at all. This is not to mention the chemical-based conversations, dialects of pheromone, lexicons of defense calls that derive from the organic compounds of plants who are signaling to one another below and above the ground. Air is thickened with aliveness and meaning. And that's probably the highest compliment, at least in my estimation, that one can give a book. I now see the world differently for having read this. I should amend that slightly. I now feel the world differently. So through the looking glass we go. With this shift in perspective about air, another world we never fully realized was there might be able to appear out of thin air. Today we talk about this air volume, and I can't wait to hear from these incredible writers, poets, activists, artist, air keepers, and ethereal beings about the variety of ways we may answer that question, what can air teach us? And with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to my good friend Dagan Miller, punk aficionado, gonzo historian, amazing essayist, cultural critic, and the editor of the Air volume.
Thanks, Gavin. I think that was the most truthful intro that anyone's ever given for me. My name is Dagan Miller. I'm a writer out here in the hill towns of Western Mass. I saw a couple of you in the chat are coming from Vermont, so hello, neighbors. Um, when Gavin reached out to me to ask me if I wanted to be an editor for one of the volumes in this series, I said yes right away, and I assumed he was going to ask me to be the editor of the Earth volume, because generally you could say that I write about landscape, and in my mind I had connected that to Earth, and so I said yes, and he said, "Great, I want you to edit the Air volume," and it was like like a record scratch, and I was like, I don't know anything about it. Like, I can't do that. I don't know anything about air. Um, but the thing about has written a fantastic book on the way of the coyote, philosophy, and stories about coyotes. Gavin is a coyote. He's a trickster character. And when Gavin throws you a screwball, there's a reason for it. So I sat down and I thought to myself, what do I, of this nothing that I know about air, what can I actually pull from this, right? That air is ineffable. It's everywhere and it's in everything, right? We can't think without air. Air through inspiration, right? It's air shares a Latin root with not only breathing and sweating, but soul. There's no creativity without air. There's no art without air. Um, but you also can't really define air, right? You can't point to something that's not air. And it's hard to think about like what is air the same as oxygen? Um, what gets carried on the air? At what point is there so much dirt or soot or pollution in the air that it's no longer air? What is this stuff, right? It's not enough to say that air is everywhere and everything. That's kind of to say that it's nowhere and nothing, but it's very, very hard to then define it. Um, so I sort of sat down and I made a list of some of my favorite writers, thinkers, um, and reached out to you all with a very broad ask that was like, I want you to think about air expansively and write about air expansively and send me 3,000 words. And you all did. It's been an incredible experience to work through drafts of all of your essays, to read each of you how you're tackling, trying to define the indefinable, right? Trying to let air into your writing and into your thinking. There are all sorts of resonances that came out that maybe we can get into. There's a lot of humor in the volume. Uh, some of it is very, very dark humor. I'm thinking you'll hear a little bit from Roy Scranton later on. Roy is one of the funniest gallows humor writers that I know. Laugh out loud funny, but all but with a very dark edge. Um, I'm not sure which piece Nick Triolo is going to read, but there are just some incredibly funny and beautiful lines in his essay as well. Um, um, but I would say overall, what sort of emerged from the pieces, and you'll hear bits of these in just a moment, is this real openness to wrestling something like an ultimate unknowability of air, right? Which opens the space for possibility. And every one of the writers, however they tackled it, really held space open for possibility in their prose, in their poetry. Felicia, it was fantastic to have you and the other poets slotting in a way. We had separate editors who picked the poems, and when when they started sending the poems to me, I was like, oh my God, these fit so perfectly, so perfectly. Um, it was a real pleasure and a real joy. Um, the last thing that I'll say real quickly before giving just a little bit of an overview of what's going to happen next, these are dark times that we're living in. All times are also dark times. There have never been, times that are uniformly light. There's brutality in what Wall Stegner called like a cheap $2 meanness everywhere. But writers in this volume have really shown me that as long as we can still breathe, as long as we can still draw a breath, there is still always beauty and community. And so I want to say thanks to all of you, thanks to Gavin, thanks to Bruce, and thanks to the center for giving me this impossible task that was not necessarily the one I thought I was going to get. It's just been such an honor to spend time with all of your words. Um, so real quickly, we're going to do this river of words thing. And for those of you out in Zoom land, what that means is that each of the folks on the screen is going to read about a minute-ish from their piece. And we'll sort of hold the questions till the end. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's like a Q&A button. You can also drop questions in the chat if that's easier, you can drop questions also in the Q&A section, and we'll have a time for Q&A at the end. Um, and to start us off with this river of words is actually going to be someone that I'm meeting for the first time today, but Mayor Montgomery, who designed the cover. Like, don't judge a book by a cover, but except for the Elemental series, the covers are fantastic. And when I saw the mock-ups, I was just like, oh yes, this is fantastic. So I think Mare is going to start us off on the River of Words.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I really loved working on this book series. I could go on and on, but I wrote something so I don't ramble. So I'm just going to tell you briefly about my experience designing the book series here, the covers. So when Gavin and I first started discussing the Elementals book series, we knew the books needed to feel cohesive, obviously, like they were part of a larger elemental life, while still allowing each one to stand on its own and capture the unique complexity of its element. That's a tall order. So, how do you visually represent something as vast and as varied as air? How do you illustrate all the ways air exists in nature? That's when I started thinking about how these elements interact, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in chaos, to build the ecosystems of our world. And then I thought, okay, a kaleidoscope. It's the perfect metaphor to me, taking countless tiny pieces and arranging them into something that feels both balanced and chaotic at the same time. The idea just felt right, but the next question was what exactly would make up each kaleidoscope? So I went back to my personal archive where I save art and images for inspiration. And I had this incredible collection of open source scientific illustrations from biodiversity libraries. And they were perfect. First, because they were free to use. And second, because when I went digging for more, I found hundreds and hundreds of them. And they're all in a very consistent artistic style from when they were illustrated. That meant that I would not have to manipulate them very much in order to create a cohesive visual language to use. So each image draws from dozens and dozens of illustrations that I digitally cut up and put together to make the kaleidoscopic images for the entire series. And then from there, I just started to play. Gavin and his team are such thoughtful and curious collaborators. So that really gave me the freedom to push boundaries and create something unique. And for air specifically, I wanted to showcase several different ways we see air in the world. So I incorporated clouds and seeds drifting on the wind. There's birds in flight, insects, eggs, flying fish, bats, but then also space for everything in between, particles, pollution, light, dust, thought, and breath. All of these elements that evoke the idea of lift and movement, so ultimately air. It all came together in a way that felt both scientific and poetic, just like the elements themselves.
Okay, I think unfortunately I'm up again, and then that'll be it for me. I'm going to read just a very short bit from the introduction that I wrote to the volume. It's called Breathe. In the beginning was the word, but this can't quite be right, for a word is the child of sound, waves rippling the air, and the desire to speak, a desire we call inspiration, in whose Latin root spirare, also the root of the word spirit, means to breathe. In the beginning, then, long before the first word cried its infant sound into the world, before the deep breath of inspiration, there was air. The pre-Socratic philosopher Anaximenes held that air was the foundation of everything that was, is, and will come to be. That, quote, just as our soul, being air, holds us together and controls us, so do breath and air surround the whole cosmos, end quote. That air, as Cicero understood his predecessors' thinking, was godlike, quote, infinite and always in motion. Infinite and always in motion, constituent of everything. We need not call ourselves disciples of Anaximenes to feel the weight of his truth. Air is unutterably old, and its spirit carries with it the story of everything. Andy, I think you're up.
Beautiful. Thanks, Tegan. Hi, my name's Andrew Yang. I'm a visual artist and I also teach environmental studies at a small college out here in Western Massachusetts. And I want to just read a small section of my essay, which is called On the Poetics and Mathematics of Air. There's cameos by Basho, Immanuel Kant, the graduating class of 1988, Timothy Morton. This portion features Walt Whitman. Okay. The atmosphere is not a perfume. It has no taste of the distillation. It is odorless. It is for my mouth forever. I am in love with it. I am mad for it to be in contact with me, the smoke of my own breath, my respiration and inspiration, the beating of my heart, the passing of blood and air through my lungs. Walt Whitman, Song of Myself. There is no air without earth. The Cambridge and the Oxford dictionaries converge on almost identical definitions of air. The mixture of gases that surrounds the earth and that we breathe. But in capturing air as both a geophysical phenomena that we recognize as sky or space, and an embodied engagement that we experience as breath, a duality emerges. Air is at once distantly external and intimately internal, an extended vault of atmosphere above us, and just as equally a quiet sigh within us. It isn't obvious how to make sense of the Janus-face disjunct of an air that is here and there, but somehow nowhere in between. Add to this the fact that at this moment you are likely inhaling a molecule of Walt Whitman's last breath, taken on March 26, 1892, in Camden, New Jersey. It is as preposterous and unnerving as it is true. Poetry can have that quality, as can physics. There is a seductive wonder in sharing the smoke of Whitman's own breath across a century, just as there is a sublimity to one among his last 25 sextillion molecules of respiration, circulating in the troposphere for generations, only to enter your body right now. Thanks. So I'll pass it on to Nick.
Hey everybody, my name is Nick Triolo. I'm calling in from Missoula, Montana, Western Montana. I'm just so grateful to be part of this group. Totally just floored by the collection of writers and the beauty of this collection. So thank you for being here. And thank you for including me. Okay, I have a funny piece in this collection called Castles in the Air. I'll just set it up for 2 seconds and then I'm gonna read, this might be taboo, but I'm going to read the last paragraph of this piece. And the setup is I was in Las Vegas reporting for Outside, and I got really obsessed with air bars, oxygen bars, air saloons, as I like to call them. And I was like, what is this? What are these air saloons? What's going on here? And I spent a disproportionate amount of time researching the history, tracking the privatization of air through literature and pop culture. And this piece is sort of an inhalation, exhalation piece that sort of braids one through the strangeness about privatizing air, which I mean seems to be fitting right now as we're privatizing everything. So the last thing I'll say is I'm gonna reference a person named Simcha. Simcha is an elder man, an old man who's referenced in a book that is in the piece called "The Man Who Sold Air in the Holy Land." Simcha is an old grifter who basically was in Jerusalem trying to like bottle air and sell it to tourists. So that's all you need to know. Okay. My visit to the oxygen bar proved highly unusual, but it brought me to the steaming lip of the Anthropocene's cratered center. It laid bare the objectification of elements as ubiquitous as air and water, the turning of abundance into scarcity, the abstraction that maintains the separation between humans and the air we breathe, what the naturalist philosopher David Abram called the, quote, commonwealth of breath, a shared atmosphere filled with language and exchange. And here in this commonwealth, I think of Simcha, the poor bastard who tried selling air in the Holy Land. Simcha, the con man, Simcha, the broken father, alone, trying to take care of his daughter, so full of promise, so full of life. Simcha, homeless and bailed out by his own child, exiled and alienated, yet holding firm to his delusion of eventual bounty, building his castles in the air, a house without foundation, a racket to which he held firm in the belief that air was ever something separate, ever something outside our bodies. Simcha, in the end, learns that he was bottling and selling himself the whole time. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Um, Thanks, Dagan, and also Gavin. It's so lovely to meet you via Zoom and to be reading with all the authors tonight. My name is Felicia Zamora. I go by she, her. I am a poet and a professor here at the University of Cincinnati. I'm in Ohio. I don't know if anybody else was from Ohio, but here I am. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy shit going on right now. With the government and state level. And for me, I truly believe that art is activism, like not just us as artists being activists, but I believe that our art is activism because what we create, we send into the world and we don't actually know how it has that possibility to change people's minds. You know, Duchamp put a fucking urinal in a museum because he wanted to change perspectives on what art meant. And everything that we create has that ability to have someone think deeper, think in a way that we need in order to think about how this planet is going to heal from the damage that we're doing to it, for sure. So I teach creative writing in the environment, and I'm teaching it this semester to my undergrads. And every time that they feel estranged from the more than human world, I have to remind them, close your eyes and breathe in. The more than human world is inside you. Our wildness is inside of us. So if you need a little boost, breathe in and remember your wildness, and the more than human aspects of us we're always together. And we need that right now for resistance. So I'm going to read my the last half of my poem on blessings and want. I'm going to start with the first like kind of line sentence, and then I'm going to drop down to the second half, just so you can kind of get a feel for where it begins. And then I guess Nick, faux pas, right? Reading the end. On blessings and want. A cumulus cloud streaks the belly of horizon, reminds me of the illusion of stillness. I want to heal in a world where carbon emissions don't eat the world first, where greenhouse gases stop trapping heat, where the pumpkins rotting in the dump don't turn to methane. All the methane building and those ghostly fists pummel and pummel, where I don't first worry about what the clouds bring before worrying about the clouds themselves. A wickedness to wanting. So I learn from the clouds, look for blessings before the frost and within each crystalline formation. I open to stillness in all my biological humming. Bless my openings, my permeable epidermis. Bless my surfaces, seen and unseen. Bless my jaw and bony hingeness. Bless my mutation of mutability, cloud-esque, from stratocumulus to pneumostratus to cirrocumulus. Let me paint the sky. Bless the air that moves through me. Bless the bees. Oh, please let the bees become unendangered. Bless floating water. In all my formations, I bow to Mother Wind in her gentle embrace, terrible embrace. Behind my breastbone, a thud, thud. Bless me, Mother. I am your hapless daughter who forgets you, then falls to my knees, myocardium gasping. Shape me. Thanks.
So beautiful. And I'm Sarah. In the book, I actually follow Felicia, so this is perfect and difficult because, wow, hard to pick up from that beauty. I am calling in from Indiana, so right next door to you in Ohio, Felicia. I am a yoga teacher. I am a breathwork coach. I'm a sort of spiritual embodiment coach and a mom. I can't forget that, really important in forming of my work. And so honored to be part of this collection. And for me, the way into air was through the breath, just as a breathwork coach and as a yoga practitioner and teacher. But really, my original way into the writing was through just remembrance of experience of life without the breath. You know, for me to begin to grapple with the weight of air and the experience of breath was to really begin to try to wrap my mind around what it's like without the breath. And so for that, I went back in my life to times I remembered being without breath before I kind of wove in the experience of learning how to consciously and in a really intentional way relate to the breath and all that it holds, which really the essay really which is called "We Will Know Ourselves, Beloved," grapples with what the breath carries in terms of vitality, life itself, and even, dare I say, love itself, to use that big word. And so I'm just going to read from the first section of the essay, "We Will Know Ourselves, Beloved." Just before the fall, I can see it all. The identical roofs of Beaudrab Drive, the suburban straight lines of utility poles, and just beyond the tree line, the corn rows of the last remaining farm. I am 9 years old and I have never climbed higher. Not when I had shimmied up our basketball hoop to distract my older brothers during their neighborhood game. Not when I had helped my dad clean out clumps of leaves from the roof gutters. This is different. Blue sky high, bird wing high, heaven bound high. Perched on that ladder-like pine branch, I lean outward, a wisp of a thing hanging in the air, until suddenly the branch shivers beneath me, my foot slips and I am falling. Slow, slow, as if in a dream. Pine needles whisper past my cheek, branches ease my speed, and there, just to my left, I am sure I see an angel. Not just any angel, my angel. With the sudden insight of a spiritual revelation, I understand that while she is invisible most of the time, she's always here with me, whether I see her or not, holding me, guiding me, directing and redirecting me. Her wings help me now as I float downward in a lazy, feathery fall. This isn't bad, I think. But then it changes. Just like that, I land hard, a packed dirt root ground hard. My spiritual X-ray vision and angel feather air have abandoned me. And along with them, my breath. I gulp. My mouth twists open. I struggle, but nothing happens. As if suctioned out by a vacuum, my breath has left my body, and I am buried, a dark and heavy lump. From far away, my sister's voice breezes down. Please, don't die. The air carries her voice. It falls to me, weighted with longing. Please, please don't die. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think we are going in order of the, because I remember those words. Thank you so much. And thank you for gathering us tonight and including my work in this beautiful anthology. I'm Michelle Wick, and I'm calling in from Western Mass also. And I'm so honored to be among this thoughtful community of writers and speaking with all of you tonight. I teach in the psychology department at Smith College. This semester, I'm teaching climate change and mental health. And I'm also co-founder and co-director of Arts Afield, a program that brings together the arts, humanities, and sciences at Smith's Art Ada and Archibald MacLeish Field Station out in Whately, Mass, about 20 minutes from campus. Arts Afield artist in residence Gina Siepel spent several years studying a red oak tree as part of their project to understand a tree. And my essay for Air is a conversation basically with this work. Breath is among the many themes probed in this provocative project, particularly the reciprocal relationship between humans and plants, how our mutual exhalations are sequestered in body, bone, leaf, stem, to name a few. I'll read 2 short paragraphs, the beginning, and like others, the end as well, last paragraph. Thanks for listening, and I hope you will read and enjoy the whole volume as I have, and I've read it many times. So to start, in art, negative space is the seemingly vacant zone surrounding the subject, a place for the eye, ear, or mind to rest, airspace. Though considered lesser by some, for many it is the heart of form and possibility. And to end, this is what art like Gina's can do. Make me sniff at trees and reconsider the composition of my airspace. A place of form and possibility, it swells with the sighs of those I cherish and have lost, along with the exhalations and exhortations of strangers. It pulses with invisible molecules, their presence not quite beyond my comprehension. All a part of me, a part of us. Imagine if more people understood this. Imagine. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Michelle. So I'm Roy Scranton. I'm a writer of several books. I teach creative writing and environmental humanities at the University of Notre Dame, also in Indiana, like Sarah. And I want to thank Gavin and Dagan for inviting me to be part of this. It's a real pleasure to be here. I especially want to thank Dagan because for being game, I guess, in the editorial process. The piece that I'm going to read from in the book is kind of strange piece. It's adapted. It's an adaptation or a revision or a rewriting in some ways of of Hamlet, the East German avant-garde playwright Heiner Müller's 1977 work, Hamlet's Machine, which is itself a kind of postmodern rewriting of Hamlet. And so the piece riffs on the relationship between air and aura and error and carbon dioxide and atmospheres, and there's all kinds of things going on. And I'm going to read a short monologue, I guess, from toward the end of the piece. It's where the actor playing Hamlet takes off his mask. And then he holds up his phone and takes a selfie. And he says, I don't want to eat. I don't want to drink. I don't want to die. I don't want to breathe. I don't want to kill. I don't want to live. I don't want to write. I don't want to think. I don't want the alienation of 9 p.m. I don't want to check my students' papers for the telltale signs of algorithmic intelligence. I don't want to defend the humanities. I don't want to blame STEM for the growth in business majors. I don't want to confuse air with error or confuse tears in the rain with tears in the rain. I don't want to pretend I'm not getting old. I don't want to pretend getting old makes me wise or foolish. I don't want to be a man. I don't want to be a woman. I don't want to be forced to say things I don't believe are true. I don't want government. I don't want anarchy. I don't want to check my feed. I don't want to complain about my timeline. I don't want to wallow in this bad air. I don't want to err. I don't want to see the auras of the damned huddled against the Walgreens in the rain. I don't want to walk down the street talking to myself. Now, I walk down the street talking to myself. I see the auras of the damned huddled against the Walgreens in the rain. I err, wallowing in this bad air. I complain about my timeline every time I check my feed. I want anarchy. I want effective government. I say things I don't believe. I want to be a woman. I want to be a man. Sometimes I pretend I'm not getting old. Sometimes I think getting old is making me foolish. I confuse tears in the rain with tears in the rain. I confuse error with air. I keep defending the humanities. And in the alienation of 9 p.m., I check my students' papers for the telltale signs of algorithmic intelligence. I think, I write, I kill, I live, I die, I breathe, I drink, I breathe, I eat, I breathe. Thank you.
I think we're opening it up for Q&A now, right, Gavin? That's what's next on the docket.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
By the way, thank you, everybody. Yeah, so
Yeah.
for those in the audience that are here with us, so glad that you are here. If you have questions you can have a question for an individual that you maybe something in their piece sparked something for you. You can have questions in general about the volume or about air. Whatever is on your mind, you can throw it up in the chat or in the Q&A, I guess. There's two options there. I'm not sure either one is preferable. Yeah, so I guess while you all are thinking of questions or thinking of things you'd like to ask, I was reminded in hearing people read their pieces aloud just how worth it is to dwell with these essays, to spend time with them, and really kind of bathe in the air that they create. You're getting a little fragment here, but I guess I'm just encouraging you to, to take the time to really, just because we ended with Roy's essay, I'll say, Roy, I had to really I had to read and reread, and it was worth the rereading, But when the first wave, I was like, what's going on here? And then, I really had to settle in to what I thought you were trying to do with the piece. And by the the end of my reading, it had such a powerful impact on me. So I appreciate you challenging me to read closely and challenging me to think about those larger different spinnings of meanings off of each sentence that you put down. So
Well, thanks. And I mean, thanks for taking the time. I mean, this piece is a kind of extreme example, but I feel in a way like this is something that we can do with writing, and it's something that a volume like Air does, right? Is to create this kind of the philosopher Peter Sloterdijk calls it like the act of the philosopher's interrupter, right? Like we can interrupt. We're caught up in these flows constantly of information, of energy, of action and reaction, and we're losing our minds. It's just like it's all, you know. And I think taking the time, like really, like sometimes forcing that or accentuating or pushing that kind of slow down, right? That space of reflection and like struggling with complexity. I think that's something that, you know, a lot of the, you know, all the works in the volume do, and it's something that that we can do, we can make possible as writers.
Yeah, absolutely. And along those lines, she's not here with us tonight because I think she lives in India, right, Sohini?
Yeah.
So Sohini Basak's essay, you know, for those of you who haven't had the privilege to dive in there, she, on the page, each time she would have written air, she leaves a blank space. And it's another one of those examples where it can kind of, yeah, that would be hard to replicate if she was with us tonight, you know, reading aloud the essay, but in the written form. Oh yeah, and Dagan's showing a little diagram there. She creates a window out of the text. There's some really unusual things going on in that essay where she's playing with it in a way that in terms of kind of what Roy was getting at, makes you slow down, makes you really say what, you know, stumble across it even the first few times because it's so unusual, but it's again, it's kind of rewarding, you know, that forced when you're forced to see what the author is trying to do. It does look like we have a couple of questions there. Dagan, do you want to field those?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I just want to again thank all the authors. I've read all your pieces many, many times, but to hear them, to actually hear them in your own voices, it's another mode and another method. I think one of the things that all the pieces do is there's a haunting quality, and all the pieces are haunted in various ways. And to add your voices into the sort of catalog of readings, I think underscores that quality. Okay, we've got some great questions and comments here. Rose Costello says, just to say, this is for Mary, you, just to say the covers are so beautiful. Love hearing about them. And also with Sohini Basak's piece, I don't, Mary, if you did the layout or whoever did the layout, that was a challenge, and to make it work, to make Sohini's vision work, you know, huge respect for the person who was able to lay that out on the page. Okay, thanks, Rose, for your comment. We have someone else wrote, let's see, it is beautiful to reach for the relationships we would will to life in our heads. More difficult sometimes, maybe always, to hold these relationships physically amid the dominant culture we are in. Might some of you share your more than human practices beyond breath that are themselves direct relationships, acts of world sharing, acts of giving back, acts of not taking, your translations of thought into step? That's a great question. While folks are thinking, I can just add real quickly. I mentioned at the very beginning that I'm really interested in landscapes, but for me the thing that really makes a landscape for me are trees. And so like I've just gotten into planting apple trees, some pawpaws, wild plum trees, planting trees. By the time they're mature and bearing fruit, I'll be legitimately old. So there's something about planting a tree. Edward Abbey wrote about this really, really wonderfully. There's something about planting a tree that's it's a lot like writing, right? It's a gift to the future, and that is a practice of of working with something and leaving it to the future feels like a practice that can be grounding. But I know some of you others on the screen personally, and know that you have various practices, elemental practices as well, if you'd like to share.
I'll start to the question about life in our heads, but right, how to hold these relationships physically. I think I mentioned that I teach environmental studies classes out here in Western Massachusetts, and I really like to teach a class. I just taught a class this last fall called Insect Aesthetics, and it's really a entomology class, and we spend an inordinate amount of time in the tall grass and turning over rocks, and students just grabbing insects and learning how to identify them, and gaining this sort of intimacy with this very alien earthling. Uh, you know, One thing that I think is really interesting in that kind of class in particular is half of the class is really fascinated with insects and half the class is completely terrified of insects, and yet those students take the class anyway. And so it's really this process of building this kind of relationship that they're actually quite averse to, but they feel somehow at the same time also compelled to engage with. So having 14 weeks to sort of really unpack that as a process, having them sort of like gain that intimacy, but then also gain conceptual knowledge, evolutionary, ecological, but also just hands-on, I think is a really interesting process. It's, insects are really considered either agricultural pests or something akin to dinosaurs, things that kids should be interested in. So to get college students really interested in this sort of like the majority other of the planet, I think is, one great way to do it is really through teaching, for me at least.
I'll jump in because I actually think that Andy's comment kind of aligns with some of the thinking that I do. I know, as a woman of color, it's kind of dicey to call myself a thing. But I do believe that I've been wanting to reclaim my thingness a lot over the last like 15 to 20 years, about how we have marsh gases in our guts, and we're made of the same materials that comet tails are made of. It's like we are so more than human at times than human. We're just inanimate pieces that have been cobbled together and are animate. And I think a lot about like a reciprocity and gratitude, and like Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. I teach that a lot. And something that I ask my students to do, because I've created it in my own existence, is creating rituals of returning to the same natural place. And I ask my students to every 2 weeks go back to the same natural place and just take field notes about what they see around them, what they're experiencing in the place over an entire semester, which they get to see the seasons change if here in Ohio, and take note and to listen, and to not make it be about our thinking, but about a somatic experience of where we're at. And so in my daily practice, I try to believe in my thingness and also believe in my body sometimes more than my mind, because our body holds a different type of memory and a different type of memorying that our mind sometimes disobeys that wildness inside of us. So, ritualistic practices, the ceremony doesn't have to be big. Kimmerer tells us that, it could be just giving thanks to the coffee and thinking about the ways in which coffee grounds can give back to the world, and taking those small steps, because if we try to do everything all at once, we can become really overwhelmed, and fighting eco despair is one of the biggest things that we have to combat too when we're trying to make practices that feel sustainable.
Alicia, while we've got you on the horn, maybe there's a great question here from um, the great scholar and writer Kim Ruffin. She wrote in and said, for Felicia, following your comments about art as activism, as a poet, how did your work act on you? In other words, what inspiration for progressive action about the environment did writing the piece for the collection give you, if it did?
Oh, thank you. I mean, gosh, my art, my art shows me so much. I am an artist who also believes that at times I can channel ancestors, and I also channel like literary ancestors. I mean, there are times that I create and I walk away from it to revise it, and I have to I have to reacquaint myself with it because I don't actually fully remember making it. And so, that ineffable process of creation in the arts, I think poetry is a lot like writing poetry is a lot like painting and sculpting at times. And so it shows me a lot of things. And I think for writing this piece in particular, um, I would it's actually a section of a manuscript that'll be coming out. Oh my goodness, which one is this? Oh yeah, it's actually coming out in April. I think this one is coming out. That has to do about you know climate change and our relationship to it. And I think for me, I research as much as I write. There's a lot of incubation period where I'm reading and reading and reading, and I know that there is a lot of like queer Black climate writers, especially like Alexis Pauline Gumbs is a huge, huge influence for me. But then also like Dion Brand, The Blue Clerk, Ars Poetica and 59 Versos is like one of the most important books I've ever read. And even though one would argue that that's not, it might not be labeled as like eco-poetics there, I think that for me it has to do, like, our humanity is so bound to the more than human world, and bound to sort of the decisions that happen ecologically, that texts tend to bleed into each other. Craig Santos Perez, of course, is actually someone I teach all the time. And so when Craig reached out to me for for this, I was like, oh, I think I might be rambling a little bit, so I will probably stop there. But I learn and research, and it teaches me, and this idea of stillness, or the perception of stillness, which is just, it's a lie, like nothing is still, right? And to think that we can be still is just this fallacy. And rethinking about that for this piece, and how the motion, emotion, and energies that are really held and bound with our humanity and the more than human world, I think that constantly teaches me in everything that I'm reading, or everything I'm reading, and then also comes out into the writing too.
Maybe we have time for one more. There's a ton of audience chatter. Nick, people want to know what an air bar, what's an air saloon? Tell us a little bit about an air saloon. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
I'll be quick. Sorry, yeah, I know that I was moving through that fast. An air saloon is a little kiosk. They're the highest density on planet Earth is in Las Vegas, and they're basically these like little kiosks where you pay $50 for half an hour of an air infusion, 90% pure oxygen. You can infuse it with a weird bubblegum flavor if you'd like, eucalyptus. It's the strangest thing it's one of the more stranger experiences I've had. And I think that, it has its historical roots in actually in Japan. They had these oxygen bars to sort of combat air pollution. You also see them up in kind of like high elevation, like mountain towns, to sort of like there's pseudoscience around them being used to sort of calibrate to high elevation and rarefied air, but it's sort of unfounded. And so, I did jump in on one. I paid for one session. I felt like worse after I was done with it. So I don't really have many positive things to say about it, but it did make for a really fun writing assignment. And I mean, the more I dug into the research and more I dug into the literature, it's everywhere. Like I mean, there's like Jules Verne, it's in some like Pixar films. It's like, like the Lorax deals with proprietary air. So it's just to privatize the commons was really what I wanted to get to. What was that like strange, like late capitalist human, like weird impulse to like privatize everything, including the air we breathe. I wanted to get to the bottom of that, and I sort of did, and it was fun and dark.
And I'll just say real quick that one of the real joys of editing Nick's piece, there are a couple of characters in his essay, and the humanity with which he writes about his characters, who another writer could have easily lampooned. The humanity that Nick brings to his writing is really remarkable. Yeah, it was a great piece. Thanks, Nick. Thanks. That's probably just about time, right, Gav? I mean, do we go long? What do we?
I just want to give anybody who hasn't spoken or wants to speak one more time just a chance. If any of the panelists, if one of the questions that you were like, oh, I should say something about that, and then we kind of went past you. If you have anything you want to throw in there, whether it's what you do as a practice to bring this into the body, or what you do to sort of give back, or if it's about kind of the Commonwealth of Air as a theme that we just, we're talking about there. I mean, certainly the elementals like earth, water, fire, air, soil, if you want to, put that as a synonym for earth. These are all the commons, and the struggle of our time really is how to treat the commons as something other than a private commodity, and how we can do that respectfully and with honor in a way that we're adapting and aligning ourselves with these elemental forces, so that we aren't pushing past these thresholds or limits where it turns back on us. And something that, like, I'm looking at Sarah's comforting fire in the background there, the comfort of fire, but then of course we just experienced fires in Los Angeles that were anything but comforting, so it has the elementals within within certain parameters can be life-giving, but when we exceed those thresholds, they can be, of course, life-taking. And so a big part of these books is learning how to try to live into that more than human relationship that Felicia referenced. How do we as composite beings live within these different forces and honor them to with our practices. So if anybody wants to kind of jump in for one last thought about an air practice or something like that, I think it might be a nice thing to go out on. Bruce. And then I think Sarah, you were reaching for the button there. All right, Bruce and then Sarah. Bruce, you're on mute.
Yeah, just a real quick observation. It tweaks a little bit the continuation of the air volume. I just wanted to say that all of us in the here, I think, are authors, and we submit our work, and have sometimes, most of us, functioned as editors, receiving the work and giving feedback. And what Roy said a while back reminded me of this. To me, as a co-editor of the book, I read and commented on all of the submissions, and it was a remarkable process with this collection of books in particular. The interaction that we were able to sustain, Kevin and I, with all of you as authors, was creative. It made something happen that we didn't expect to happen at the very beginning. I think you'd probably say you felt something of that yourself, Deegan, also. So I just wanted to mention that, because there's a number of important things have been said about what came up and how we were transformed, all of us, in the action of sort of working on these essays and poems and getting them into print. and the cover design, of course. But this this showed me something about what a really intelligent and emotive at the same time editorial process, writing process can do. And it can really, and it did in this particular instance, I think, improve the book that we have co-produced and co-created. So I just wanted to say that, put it on the record, as it were. I can say the same thing about all of the volumes in this collection, and those to come. I don't know if you are aware, but Humans in Nature Press just sort of opened it up for uncommissioned submission of manuscripts for publication. And we had a tremendous response to our initial call for proposals and book manuscripts. And right now, my dining room table is absolutely piled with book length manuscripts to be read. And I look back at, maybe we ought to change that that process a little bit. But man, the response has been, and I've read enough of them myself, and Gavin, I think, has read all of them. There's tremendously creative ideas in there. And so we have voices in the land that I sometimes forget about when I listen to the news. And but they're there. They're on my dining room table in case any of you want to see them. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Bruce. Sarah, did you want to hop in?
Yeah, well, I wanted a couple of things. One, Kate in the question and answer had said, "Isn't air the universal space of consciousness?" She finds that comforting, she says, and I would just say that I don't think we can define consciousness yet after many thousands of years that we're still kind of trying to figure out what it is and where it resides. And that's one of the joys of the exploration, I think. And for me, it points to, this question of how do we engage, a little bit like Dagan felt right away. It's like, how do we engage with this element? I also didn't expect Gavin to reach out to me and talk about air. I'm like, please give me fire. I have like 5 fire planets in my astrological birth chart. I'll talk about fire. But I found air, even though I'm a breathwork coach and I engage with air, so to speak, it felt so difficult to engage, in this thing that's not so tactile. And so I've just been really enjoying thinking about the way that we share this universal space. It's like we have to look at the evidence of its presence. And I find that really interesting. And I think, when we think about air, we need something else in order to see its evidence, really, in order to engage with it in a sensory way, in a certain way. And I think of the body, really, the human body, and then the more than human body is the way that we share that universal experience. Of course, like there's so much mystery in it, in consciousness and in what each of our experiences might be with air, with any of these elements. But I think of how do we honor it? It's kind of hearkening back to that first question. How do we honor this? And I think there's no better way of honoring it than in intentionally, maybe consciously, to use that word, relating to the body. How do we relate to the body, our bodies, the bodies of others, the bodies of things that are not human, the body of the earth? How do we relate? And then that's where I think presence is. And I think of presence as that shared, that's where we share the experience, is in being with. And I don't know that there's the language for that, right? There's not always language. And so to be in experience of the air is so profound. And I think that's why I found this project fascinating and compelling, and all of the things that I read so wildly different, you know, how incredible, because it is this element that needs it needs to like mitigation or something, you know, it needs something to translate it. And I think the body does that. And then of course we have such unique experiences in the body. So how do we honor it? I think through the rituals of the body, like Felicia was saying. And for me specifically, I do a moon ritual twice a month on the new and the full moon to relate to, you know, the body of this planet and the rhythms of this planet that live in our bodies. And so full moon and the new moon, I do a you know, kind of ancient rest ritual that you know, engages the breath, but takes one deep into a non-normative consciousness, one might say. And in that, you know, I'm channeling the energy of the nature and through the body, but only through the body, right? Really here. So I think I'm also rambling a little bit, but that's such a big question to answer, really. It's one, how do you really honor this? It's a tough one to really try to sum that up, but also, you know, what's our shared consciousness? Also very difficult, but I think sitting here in space like this really gets close to it. So I really appreciate being here in presence with everyone. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing this airspace with us and for sharing the electromagnetic waves shooting into your computer that allow us to see one another across, you know, across great geographical divides. Chris, you can hop back on, or Chris, if you can hop back on if you would like. But I also just want to say one last thank you to the contributors to this volume. And man, I hope those of you who joined us tonight will have a chance to dive in and read this.